Welcome back. InSight Bytes 3. Still looking at the courts and the Australian judicial system. I want to move on to this notion of judicial independence. It's a big deal because we want to make sure an independent judiciary can ensure that those entrusted with public power act in accordance with the law, so that executive, when they execute the law, Parliament, when they legislate and create the law, are they doing so within the power? So Parliament is constrained by Constitution and executive is constrained by the Constitution as well, but also, as we saw last week, the executive are often given power under legislation. So is the exercise of executive power ultra vires beyond the power of the legislation? And we need a strong and independent judiciary to promote that. Now, we talked about an essential element of the rule of law being that that the rule of law is that we are ruled by the rule of law rather than the rule of man, and there's a bigger system at play than an individual autocracy in our democratic society. And as part of the rule of law, you want certain characteristics. We want transparency, we want predictability, we need stability, we need enforceability and accountability, and we need due process. These are ideas of the rule of law, and as we saw, even go back to 1215 in Runnymede with the barons holding King John at knife point, sword point, to sign the Magna Carta, no one should be above the law. So we've explored the rule of law as a concept. And it's essential that we have an independent judiciary who can make sure that anyone who's got power is exercising it lawfully in accordance with the law. We've also explored the concept of the separation of powers, and again we need an independent judiciary to uphold the separation of powers in Australia. Montesquieu, a French political philosopher, famous for his work on the separation of powers, argued in 1748 an independent judiciary was crucial to protecting the rights and liberties of individuals against the state. So talking about judicial power, and I quote, "Were it joined with the legislative, the life and liberty of the subject would be exposed to arbitrary control, for the judge would then be the legislator. Were it joined to the executive power, the judge might behave with all the violence of an oppressor." Likewise, William Blackstone, famous English judge who wrote one of the most important British texts, the Laws of England, commentaries on the Law of England, and its Blackstonian notions of property rights. It was the first collection of common law doctrines in the world, wrote in 1768, "Were the judicial power joined with the legislative, the life, liberty and property of the subject would be in the hands of arbitrary judges, whose decisions would then be regulated only by their own opinions, and not by any fundamental principles of law, which though legislators may depart from, yet judges are bound to observe. Were it joined with the executive, this union might soon be an overbalance for the legislative." So what does it mean? It means we need independent judiciary who is unfettered by worries about the Parliament or the executive reducing their inability to rule on lawfulness of those other two branches of government. The Honourable Marilyn Warren, in an article in the Australian Law Journal 2011, Does Judicial Independence Matter? Famously quoted Montesquieu's The Spirit of Laws. There's no liberty if the legislature and the executive powers were not separate from the power of judging. And she quotes from that quote that the judge might behave with all the violence of an oppressor. So judges need to be free from influence. They need to be free and independent from the government of the day. Absolutely critical. We can't have governments reducing funding, sacking judges arbitrarily for not following their political desires or directions or policies, for chastising the government for overstepping, for knocking back unlawful legislation of the government because it's beyond the power conferred by the Constitution, or then subsequently knocking back the actions of the executive and ruling those unlawful if the executive operates beyond the power that it's given by legislation. What about parties before the court? What about, we don't want judges being threatened or worried by parties that they're adjudicating over. That wouldn't work. Intimidated by litigants. We don't want judges in the pockets of organised crime, mafia bosses doing their bidding. We don't want judges worried about the media. The media's got a lot to say on the judiciary, and we do want a free and unfettered media, but we don't want a judge that just bows to popular opinion, because popular opinion and the media sometimes get things wrong and oftentimes have their own agenda and don't see the whole picture that the judge may be open to. And what about this idea? We want judges obviously independent from taking bribes. We don't want corruption in the judiciary. That would be a disaster. We need confidence that our judges are giving effect to the rule of law. And need to decide cases on the basis of legal principle. Marilyn Warren, in her article, suggests the aspiration must for a judge each time he or she hears a case to be like a clean sheet of paper. What does that mean? Well, they almost need independence from their own subjective biases, any isms they may bring. It's not right to favour any party on the basis of any of their characteristics. So they almost, as Marilyn Warren says, they must be like a clean sheet of paper. They must decide the cases on the basis of legal principle. The power of judges lies in their judgment. It must be decided impartially. In order to demonstrate or show that the decision of the case was reached fearlessly and impartially, the judge needs to provide reasons, and that is, explain why that one party wins, another loses. So the reasoning behind the judicial decision making is inextricably interwoven with judicial independence. It is for these reasons for the decision that show what was written and drawn on the blank sheet of paper to reach the result at the end. This is the idea of the ratio, isn't it? The judge has to show in the judgment the logical line of reasoning, the ratio decidendi, the rationale for the decision, the because of the judgment. So, big reasons for an independent judiciary. The rule of law. We've talked about AGSI, who is famous for giving the expression the rule of law, although there are traces of the concept as far back as Aristotle. So no one can be punished or suffer any loss for breaking the law except by order of the courts. We talked about Lord Bingham in Module 1 around the rule of law. If anyone is to be penalised for breaking the law, the breach must be proved before a court of the land, not a tribunal picked from the government. And as we've said, even King John, albeit at knife point, he conceded that even the divine right of kings must come under the jurisdiction of the law, and no one is above the law, and everyone is subject to the same law applied in the same courts. Former President Trump in the United States is currently facing indictment, and he said to the court, if you come after me, I'll come after you. That was reported last week. Threatening, menacing words, trying to individualize the application of the rule of law. So, we want strong independence, and we should make sure that the system is structured so that it is maintained. Thanks.